welcome to Berkshire Guitar Amplifier Repairs. Stuart Smith here as always with you, and today a bit of an unusual one for me. It's a Fender Ultimate Chorus, not an amp I've ever had in before, and it's a transistor amp. Now I don't normally do videos on transistor amps. I would think maybe 99% of my vids are valve amps, but I thought I would do one on this because it's got a fairly typical problem, I think, for a transistor amp, and you may have it on your amp. So the problem here is it's got a quite pronounced hum on it. It works okay, but it's got a loud background hum. Now what I suspect that to be is a smoothing capacitor. I'll tell you about that a little bit more in a moment, but for now let's just have a listen to the amp and you can hear this hum for yourself. Well, it's very loud, that, so I'm going to have to shout. It's louder than it was yesterday when I tried it. Not affected by any controls, look. And if you give it a bash on top, you hear that changing its characteristic. Yeah, that's kind of how it was yesterday. Had the hum, but not that horrible buzz. There you go. That's what that was what it was like. Okay, I'll just turn that off. That's very noisy. Right, now let me tell you what I think that might be. Inside the amplifier will be obviously a printed circuit board. This is out of a valve amp, but it doesn't matter. And because it's a transistor amp, it'll have plus and minus 50 volts or something to drive the output transistors. And to derive that plus or minus 50 volts, they're going to need to smooth some AC. And normally you have a couple of big electrolytic capacitors like these to smooth the AC to produce DC. Now, like these capacitors here, they're a little bit vulnerable, and when the amp gets joggled about a bit, and in the back of the car kind of thing, these smoothing capacitors waggle backwards and forwards, and then over time the joints on the underside of them become dry joints, and eventually, of course, they'll just be open circuit. That means you've effectively taken a smoothing capacitor out, so instead of a nice DC you get a sort of hum. Now of course it may not be that, but that would be my guess, and that's particularly proven if you give the amp a bash, you see, because if you give the amp a bash, what you're doing is effectively joggling this capacitor here and making this very bad dry joint here. Just occasionally it gets a little bit better, if you give it a bash. And could even go away completely. You could even have the amp work perfectly, give it another tap, and a sort of thing, and it's just basically opening and closing the dry joint on the capacitor there. So that's what I'm hoping it is. Now, of course, it's a relatively simple fix. All you need to do is reflow these joints. However, depending on the amp, how do you get to these joints? So, for example, on this amp here, it may be that we have to take all these controls off, all the nuts off, in order to get the board out. Imagine if all the controls are on the front of this board here, all the pots, We've got to take them all off so we can get the board out to turn upside down in order to get to the capacitor joint. So that's always what takes the time, not the actual soldering. Anyway, what we'll do is we'll get the chassis out of this amp. I'm hoping there'll be some big electrolytic capacitors, and we can power it up and we can sort of get hold of it, go like that, and diagnose it right down to the exact capacitor that's faulty. I'd be quite surprised if that is not the issue. Right, we've got the chassis out, came out without any drama, and as you can see, this is sort of quite a dated kind of amp now. It's probably 35 years old. Op amps all over the place, dual op amps to do all the amplification, a single-sided printed circuit board, which they do for cheapness, which means it's got a lot of wire links across here, links in order to jump over the tracks. And as you can see, here is the two caps I was talking about. Let's give them a little waggle. Seem fairly solid actually, but that doesn't always tell you anything. So I've no idea actually whether that's the culprit or not. Now we have a problem here, of course, in that any work we need to do on this board, then all the controls have to come off the front. All the power transistors have to be taken off their mountings, or maybe not, maybe this heat sink here, that comes off, and then the board. Will it come clear of the transformer? Should do, and the board can come out. So the usual thing, quite a lot of work to do, unfortunately. This is what puts the price up for the customer. Instead of a 10-second soldering job, I've got to do a complete dismantling. Now it could be also, it could be, you know, these power resistors, they can get hot, or these diodes, look, you can see they've got fairly hot. Maybe a dry joint on one of the power diodes, possibly, not sure. Anyway, I'm going to power it up and just have a little poke around to see if we get lucky with just touching one of these capacitors and the hum comes and goes. I'll be absolutely amazed if it's not something around this area here. Good, okay, we're in our test condition now. Amp's powered up, I've got a speaker hanging on, and we've got this nice low level hum, not the horrible you know, noisy one we had. So let's have a little see if anything does anything. Okay, so my number one go-to, which is these capacitors, is not correct. Resistor. Typical, it's not amenable to being bashed now either. That's a nuisance. So not a lot of luck at the moment, actually. The only thing I've noticed is that tapping around here, there, it's quite a loud crack just there. But what's interesting is it's not changing that background hum. So we've got the background hum, and we've got that nasty buzzy hum on top, which, like that. I'm wondering if the amp has two faults. One is this rather horrible buzz, which comes about by tapping around here. You see, it doesn't happen if we tap it. Oh, he said. Difficult to track down this type of thing. I think it's more here. I've had a waggle of all these power resistors, and these little capacitors here. None of that seems to do anything. It could be that we've got a smoothing capacitor down as well. In other words, it's not intermittent, it's just as faulty, which is causing that background hum. And then we've got another problem, which is this nasty buzz that comes on top. All in all, this is not a particularly easy problem. I thought it might just be we'd waggle one of these smoothing caps and it would come and go. I've had that dozens, if not hundreds of times. Nasty. Well, we could take the board out and start dry joint hunting, but I like to get a little bit closer to the action before I start shotgunning it like that. Shame, because it becomes relatively straightforward if we narrow it down to just one component. It becomes quite hard if you have to start getting an eyeglass on every dry joint. I think we're going to have to take the board out, flip it upside down and have a look. Okay, I've taken all the nuts off all the controls as a starter, and the next thing I'm going to do is to work out how to get this heatsink off at the back there. It'll just be probably 4 screws, maybe these screws here, maybe these 6 screws, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then that'll just come off. We don't need to take the heatsink compound and the transistors off. Then we've got some board screws. Look, we've got a 1, 2, where else are they? 3 there. Then with a bit of luck, we've got all this gubbins here. We might have to see. Yeah, we're going to have to unplug all these. Otherwise, the board won't come forward. It's tied in very tight here to these speaker outputs. So we have to take those out. That's okay. What else? Yeah, oh god. I hate it when they do this kind of thing. So this reverb is soldered in here, and also, you know, it's got a real big cable clamp at the back there. But that might be okay. We might be able to push the board back and then just tilt it forward like this so that we can get to the underside. This sort of suck it and see really quite often with these jobs. Right, let's get the heatsink off and the board screws out and see how we get on. And here we are on the back, and it's these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws will hold the heatsink on, so we'll take those off. Okay, all the screws are out and the board is on the loose side. I think we'll just chop this cable tie here. Might not need to unplug any of these if the board goes back, and it's really a question of will these pots swing past the front lip here. Sometimes they do, sometimes they literally don't. Have a look. Quite a bit of force on here, there we go. That's just come past there, which allows us some kind of access to the board without going too crazy. Okay, here we are on the underside of the board, and you can clearly see the right hand side of those 2 pads there is completely unsoldered, look, and that's on the underside of one of the capacitors. So it was what I thought, but even waggling the capacitor did not make that joint make, which is interesting. So we'll solder that one up, and that will get rid of the bass level hum, the low level but I think we've still got this kind of crackly thing to worry about, so I'll have a little look around the board for other dry joints. And a little tip, whilst you've got the controls off and the board out, take the opportunity to clean this front panel here with a bit of, I use this Amber Cleanse anti-static foaming cleaner, but anything will do. And that cleans that up nicely. Very hard to do when all the controls are in, you can't get in between the controls. Right, I've had a look along the bottom of the board, can't see any more dry joints, so I'm going to take a bit of a risk and put the board back in, and then hope that all the faults have gone. You know, I didn't really like that when I was tapping, I got that much nastier hum, but yeah, it might still be an issue on the board. But anyway, I'll pop it back in and see, and power it up and see what's going on. Okay, that's the amp fixed. It's still got a bit of residual hum. I did put another capacitor across those 2 big caps, and it didn't change the hum whatsoever, so not quite sure why it's got a residual hum, but I think it's usable. It's got this stereo chorus effect. like it very much. It's a bit horrible, really. Can't think why anyone would want that. Then we have the drive. Okay, well there you go, hope you enjoyed that one. Quite a quick video today. I didn't go into too much detail, but I just wanted to show you that with these transistor amplifiers, if you have that consistent mains hum sound, a good place to look is the large smoothing capacitors, which smooth the AC into DC. And the larger the capacitor, the more it can wobble, because it's got a bit more mass, and the more likely it is to come unsoldered underneath. Easy to fix as long as you can get to the solder connections. Well, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you on the next one.